People sometimes do terrible things and think they can avoid the consequences, but they rarely do. Sooner or later, the truth catches up with them. My wife Kristen always had an airtight alibi and never gave me any reason to doubt her loyalty. Then, one small detail slipped through, and it was enough to make everything fall apart. It's often the little things that reveal the cracks in a marriage. The first red flag appeared one night when I noticed the hair on the back of her neck was damp. I hadn't really paid attention to this area before, but when she climbed into bed, I instinctively reached out to hug her. My hand brushed against the moisture. My mind immediately wondered why her neck was wet. That evening, she had attended one of her monthly extended library board meetings. I had been waiting up for her, hoping we'd have a nice evening together. It had been a week since we'd last been intimate, and I was looking forward to closing that gap. But as soon as I felt that wetness made me realize something was wrong. Kristen was 28, not what most people would call traditionally beautiful, but her figure made up for that. She was smart, funny, and I thought I could trust her completely. I loved her. She worked as an environmental biologist for the state. As for me, I am Bob, a 30-year-old civil engineer. Kristen was a 28-year-old civil engineer with a stable job at a consulting firm. We were doing well together, and a year ago, we bought a cozy 3-bedroom house. We met through work and started dating after 6 months. We had a great relationship, physically and emotionally fulfilling. We got engaged and got married after a year. We stood in front of our family and friends in a church and promised to remain faithful and respect each other. And we were building a family together. Just a week before that night, Kristen had stopped taking her birth control pills because we had decided it was time to start trying for a baby. She was in her most fertile phase a year earlier when we moved into the house. Kristen had also become close to our neighbor Samantha, who was divorced. Kristen started spending a lot of time with a woman around the same age. They went shopping or to the movies, and I didn't mind. I trusted my wife and had no reason to suspect anything was going on. Sam introduced Kristen to the local library board. At first, the meetings were short and infrequent, but after a couple of months ago, they started happening more often, twice a month, in fact. Each session lasted about 4 hours. Kristen explained that they were working on a new interactive computer system for the library. She said that since she was good with computers, the head librarian had asked for her help. After the meetings, it seemed like a valid reason, so I didn't think much of it at the time. But after one of those long meetings, I noticed Kristen seemed a bit tense and distant. When I asked her about it, she said the head librarian was difficult to work with and needed special handling. I didn't push it, but that wet hair bothered me. Why would the back of her neck be damp? Was she sweating? I wondered if she'd taken a shower. I knew she didn't shower when she got home because I'd been awake waiting for her. When I leaned in closer, I smelled a soap that wasn't ours. Maybe she'd been at a motel. As I was contemplating this, she rolled away from me, pulling the covers tighter around her. "Not tonight," she said. She said, sounding exhausted, that the meeting ran long. "I'm tired, and we both have work tomorrow." I tried to stay calm. "All right, honey, get some rest," I said, but the uneasy nod at me said otherwise. We had talked about starting a family and had even planned it. Her avoidance of intimacy after those board meetings wasn't new, and this pattern only fueled my growing doubts. I had always used fatigue as an excuse, but now I wondered if there was something she didn't want me to discover. Why would she cheat on me? That was the question I couldn't shake. We had been married for 5 years, and while we had postponed starting a family for financial reasons, now felt like the right time. I'd been promoted, and Kristen had stopped taking the pill a week earlier. It all made sense except for this nagging doubt that kept creeping in. What if things fell apart? What if she ended up pregnant by someone else? Would I be stuck paying child support? I spent the rest of the night lying awake, wondering how to handle this situation. I confronted her. I needed more evidence before I made any accusations. If I approached her with weak suspicions, she'd just deny everything, and I'd be the one left looking paranoid. But I also needed to protect myself. I decided to delay any intimacy between us at least for a while. If she was pregnant by someone else, I thought she might try to have sex with me soon to cover it up. If she'd been with someone else that night, she'd probably try to initiate intimacy with me soon. I needed to get out of town for a bit by myself. A business trip seemed like the perfect excuse. Since my trips usually lasted a week, would fit neatly into any plan she might have now. I just needed to figure out who this other man was, how long the affair had been going on, where they met, and if these meetings coincided with her library board nights. It was likely he was someone involved with the board. I quietly slipped out of bed and headed downstairs. I found her purse inside, so I started looking through her things. Her credit cards were all there, but then I found one with her maiden name, Kristen Lawrence, from a bank we weren't even associated with. I wondered why she still had it. Looking deeper, I found a business card tucked away. It belonged to William Wilde, the head librarian. He was a man she'd never mentioned, and I felt a surge of anger. I grabbed her phone and checked her call logs. Williams's number came up a lot. There were no text messages, which made sense. They must have been communicating verbally. I put her phone back and moved onto our computer. I found an encrypted email. I found a folder, but I was able to get past her security settings. I found dozens of messages between her and William from when she started going to those late board meetings. They had been meeting at the Red Roof near the interstate. Their emails were explicit. They described things she had never done with me. One of those emails was pretty harsh on me and my wife, even though they said they loved us. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I copied all the emails to a separate folder and prepared to print them later. I felt pretty numb, so I went back upstairs to the spare room, grabbed my suitcase, and started packing for an impromptu business trip by 5:30 a.m. I was ready to go, so I went to the bedroom where Kristen was just waking up. "Why are you up so early?" she asked, yawning. "I have a flight to catch," I told her. "Why are you dressed?" "I have to check on some projects at work," I said. "Can I call you if I need to?" "Sure," I said, kissing her on the cheek. I left for the airport, and she stared at me, trying to process my sudden departure. "How do I reach you if I need to?" she asked. "Just call," I said. As I headed for the door with my bags, I heard her voice behind me. "Hey Bob, what about starting a family? We were supposed to talk about that this weekend." "We'll have to push it to next month, darling. I'll call you once I get to my first stop." I opened the garage door and slid into my car. I heard her sob from behind, but by the time she could say anything else, I was already driving down the street. I made sure my phone was off. Then I hit the interstate, heading away from everything. 2 hours later, I pulled into my dad's retirement place, nestled by a quiet lake out in the countryside. He wasn't expecting me, but as soon as I walked in, he started getting breakfast ready, as he always did. We sipped coffee while I broke the news about Kristen. My dad, a widower who had always wanted a daughter, was crushed. He saw Kristen as the daughter he never had. "I can't understand. Why did she do that? Your mother and I had a strong relationship. As far as I know, she never strayed. You'll need to tread carefully here. Don't rush anything," he said, his face etched with concern. "I know, Dad. I'll head back tomorrow to meet with Tim Gordon, my lawyer. I need to find out what my legal options are. My dad's the best at making omelets." He laughed and said, "Well, if you end up cooking for yourself more often, you might even catch up to my level one day." I chuckled, though I was still feeling the weight of the situation at 9:12 a.m. I called my office to check in with my boss. We agreed that if Kristen called looking for me, they'd tell her I was on the road and that she could reach me on my cell. He even had the receptionist ready with the same story. I also asked for a week off, which he approved without hesitation. Afterward, I checked my phone for missed calls. Kristen, each call was more urgent than the last. She wanted me to call her back immediately, but I made her wait until noon. When I finally called, she sounded tense. "Where are you, honey? Can I come fly out to spend the weekend with you?" "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'll be heading out tomorrow, and I'm not sure where I'll be staying for a bit. Let's plan something. For next month." "Okay, I've got to run. The guys need me." She hesitated. "I love you." I didn't respond. I just hung up, letting the silence linger. My dad overheard the exchange and shook his head, saying nothing. The following morning, I set up a meeting with Tim Gordon. Afterward, I drove back to town, my mind a mix of nerves and anticipation. Tim greeted me with his usual warm demeanor. "Good to see you, Bob. What's going on?" "Tim, my wife's been cheating on me with another man. I need to know what my options are. If we filed based on adultery, we'd need solid proof, which would be costly to gather and hard to prove in court since we didn't have kids and Kristen had a good job. The divorce would likely be a straightforward 50-50 split." I asked about the possibility of her being pregnant by the other man, and Tim reassured me. I wouldn't have to pay child support. After our conversation, I felt a bit better. I thanked him and told him I'd get back to him with my final decision soon. I still had more work to do, though. I went to the library and looked around until I found the door marked Head Librarian. I went in. I picked up a magazine and sat nearby, keeping an eye on the door. After about 30 minutes, a man around my age stepped out. He looked so plain and average that I wondered what Kristen saw in him that was worth risking everything we had. I left the library and went to an electronics store where I picked up a voice-activated recorder. I checked into the Red Roof in the same place where Kristen and William had met. I got a room for the night and, with some time to kill, I went back home. I needed to check our computer. Their recent emails hinted at her fears about a possible pregnancy. She hadn't been with me recently, so they were worried. William might end up being the father. I took some satisfaction in seeing their panic and copied the messages to my own files later. Back in the motel room, I tried to relax by watching TV, but my thoughts kept drifting back to why she had done this. We had a decent life together. We were planning for a future together with kids. Retirement, the whole thing. Our relationship wasn't as exciting as it had been in the early years, but it was still going strong. Her reaction to my sudden business trip made me wonder, was she pregnant with William's child? Had she already decided to choose him over me? Maybe there was a side to her I hadn't seen before. As I thought about the past 5 years, I felt a deep sense of loss. Those years now seemed wasted, tainted by her betrayal. Even if she hadn't gotten pregnant, I knew I couldn't forgive her. Divorce was inevitable, but first I had to confront her, and that wasn't something I looked forward to. A.M. I called home. She picked up. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked. "Honey, I just want you to come home. I'll try to get back soon. Maybe talk to Sam. She can cheer you up." I had a feeling Sam knew more about Kristen's affairs than she let on at this point. I didn't care. "Sure, honey. I love you. I'll see you soon." I went to the motel office, and I was glad to see a young guy working the desk. I didn't want to waste time with small talk. I gave him $100 to look into the motel's records. I told him Kristen's maiden name and the approximate dates of their meetings. He said he'd check the logs and have a list for me by the morning. That night, I didn't get much sleep. The next morning, I went straight to the office. As I suspected, he had the list. It turned out that Kristen and William had been meeting up after her library board meetings. When I showed the young man at the motel a picture of my wife, he seemed to recognize her. He confirmed that she had checked in using her credit card and that he remembered her because she was discreet yet consistent in her visits. He said they only stayed for about an hour each time before leaving in separate cars. He'd seen a lot of unfaithful spouses come through the place after a quick breakfast. I drove back to my dad's house. The rest of the week passed in a blur of fishing trips and quiet conversations. On Thursday, I called Tim Gordon and told him to start the divorce proceedings. He said he'd have the paperwork ready within a few days. I spent each night calling Kristen, keeping up the pretense that I was in different cities. She believed I was on a business trip. She sounded more and more distraught with each call, which made me feel a twinge of pity. Still, I wasn't about to let her off the hook. Revenge was brewing inside me, though it felt bittersweet. I got back home Friday afternoon. While she was still at work, it seemed like her affair was losing steam. I realized I wouldn't need the recording device anymore and could return it for a refund. I already had more than enough proof of her betrayal. I sat down and printed out 2 copies of their email exchanges. Williams's wife deserved to see what had been going on. I hadn't yet decided when to confront Kristen. Should I do it right away or wait until she confirmed she was pregnant? When she returned from work that evening, she practically threw herself at me, hugging me tightly and crying. "Darling, I've missed you so much," she sobbed. I tried to keep things light. "What's going on, darling? Did the sink clog up again?" She shook her head no. She said she'd realized how much she loved me and how much she'd missed me after dinner. She wanted to finally make that plan we'd been talking about happen. She asked if I wanted to leave more often. I said with a hint of sarcasm, "No, don't ever leave me again." She pleaded, "No, don't leave me." I said, "All right, let's have dinner first, and afterward we'll head upstairs for some quality time." I forced a smile. She smiled through her tears, relieved. "That sounds perfect." I felt like an idiot after dinner at a nearby restaurant. We rushed home. She was practically sprinting up the stairs to our bedroom, eager to make things right. By the time I joined her, she was already lying on the bed, looking up at me with anticipation. "Hurry up, dear. I'm ready," she said breathlessly. I took my time folding my clothes, unable to shake the thoughts running through my head. I thought grimly, looking at her, that I was ready, but I realized there was a part of me that would miss her. I knew I wasn't going to let anyone else have her. She had been mine, and I'd always believed she still was until now. Time was running out, soon she wouldn't legally be mine anymore. I kissed her lightly on the lips, trying to mask my true feelings. Then she took control. She was trying to win me back to soothe my doubts, just like she'd written in her emails with William. I decided to do something cruel, something that might seem petty, but it felt fitting for the moment. I let things build up, bringing her to the edge, and then I stopped just seconds before the end. I pulled away. "What are you doing?" she gasped, clearly confused. "What's wrong?" I sat on the edge of the bed. I finally got up from the bed and said what I'd been holding back. "Kristen and I needed to talk. The reason I stopped is simple. I can't get the image of you with William out of my head." Her breath hitched, and when I turned to look at her, her face was a mask of horror. "It's over," I said quietly. "I'm filing for divorce." She shot up from the bed and ran to the bathroom, where I heard her vomiting. The sound echoed. After she'd finished throwing up, I went into the bathroom to check on her. She was slumped on the floor, sobbing into her hands. I didn't want to bother her, so I went downstairs, had a stiff drink, and waited for her to join me. I knew she'd come down eventually, hoping to salvage whatever she could from the situation. She might even try to convince me not to go through with the divorce, but I knew better. There was nothing left to save. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow from the kitchen. As I sipped my drink, I thought about the direction my life was heading. I was still young, with plenty of time to build the family I wanted and continue climbing the career ladder. Despite that, I felt a sense of emptiness. The sobbing had stopped upstairs, indicating that she was moving from shock to denial. It wouldn't be long before she came down. Sure enough, after some time, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She entered the living room wrapped in a bathrobe and sat across from me. Her face was tear-streaked and weary. I reached over and flipped on a light. "Are you ready to talk now?" I asked. My voice was calm. Cal, are you ready? To tell me why you did this, she said, swallowing hard. Her voice was barely a whisper. Yes, I don't know why I did it, Bob. I swear that after the first time, I told myself I'd never do it again. It started so innocently, just having drinks after meetings. But you know how I get after a few drinks. It seemed so tempting, so exciting. And it got easier every time she looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I think hearing Sam talk about cheating on her ex-husband. My husband made me curious. I should have known better, but I didn't stop. I don't know why I didn't stop. Why did you do it the first time? I asked. My voice was tight with frustration. Was there something in our conversations about loyalty and trust before we got married that you didn't understand? Maybe there was something in the vows we made. We promised to forsake all others. Was that unclear? Did you disagree with that? Those commitments, why didn't you tell me back then? I sigh, feeling the weight of the last 5 years pressing down on me. I've given you 5 years of my life, Kristen, and now I'm the one who has to start over, searching for someone who actually understands the importance of fidelity in a marriage. She was trembling now, tears in her eyes. Bobby, let's try to work this out. I love you. I don't want to lose you. I still want to have children with you. I shook my head, trying to stay calm. Let's get one thing straight. I said, coldly, you lost the right to call me honey or any of those other tender names the moment you crawled into bed with him. Do you understand? Her eyes were filled with denial, despite everything I had said. I was starting to lose patience, but I forced myself to remain calm. I wasn't going to let anger get the best of me. I continued, speaking of children. When exactly do you plan on finding out if you're pregnant? It was the second time that night her face turned pale. She stared at me in shock as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, Kristen, I replied, my voice sharp. You want to know why I faked that business trip. I did it to make you feel some of the pain I've been feeling. That's why I'm pushing for a divorce. You went out of your way to try and conceive a child with your lover. You hoped I'd sleep with you afterward to cover up his tracks. You wanted me to raise his child. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. That's not going to happen. Kristen, what you did is one of the worst things a wife can do to her husband. It showed complete disrespect for me and for our marriage. There's no coming back from that. Even if you hadn't gone so far, I might have been able to forgive you, but you didn't stop. You kept going over and over again, and that's something I'll never be able to forgive. Therapy won't fix this, and nothing will. He paused, giving her one last chance to explain herself. Do you have anything to say for yourself? She shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Bob. Well, that's settled. Then I've already spoken to Tim Gordon, and the divorce papers will be ready by Monday. We'll split. Everything is going to be 50-50, and there won't be any alimony, even if you were pregnant. I won't be paying child support because it's not my child. Are you okay with that arrangement? Her voice was shaky, but she nodded. It seems fair. I'll talk to a lawyer before I agree, but it seems fair. Good. I said, standing up. I'll sleep in the spare room until we're officially separated. In the meantime, I'll look for an apartment for you. You can stay here and entertain your lovers. Once I'm gone, it's over with William. She muttered, her eyes downcast. I gathered. I replied to the emails, and I was pretty clear about how I felt. It's a shame you didn't end it sooner. Her head shot up. You read our emails? I confirmed, meeting her gaze. I've made copies of them, along with the dates and times of your meetings at the Red Roof. I'll be taking those to William's wife tomorrow. She deserves to know what's been going on behind her back. You met him there 13 times. You used a credit card under your maiden name, probably just in case. That makes me wonder. How many other relationships you had before William? Her face fell as I continued. Her wife needs to know the truth, and if you're pregnant, William might be the one on the hook for child support. That's between the two of you. Do you have to bring him into this? She pleaded. He has kids, Bob. I don't think having children should absolve him from the consequences of his actions. I might still consider filing an alienation of affection lawsuit against him. Please don't do that. She begged, sounding more "we'll see if I was right." Is that all she had to say? She took a moment to gather herself. Then she said, "Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to your parents and your brother. They deserve to know the truth. I don't want you to tell them a story that makes me look bad. And if you're pregnant, I'll make sure your colleagues and friends know what you've done to me." She started to cry again. I stood up and left without saying anything to comfort her. I had nothing more to say, so I went upstairs and left her to deal with her guilt. I went to bed in the spare room. The next morning, I left early. I left the house before Kristen woke up and took the emails and motel records with me. I knew she'd been crying all night and was probably exhausted by now. Breakfast at IHOP felt like the first step in what would become my new routine. I figured it was time to start getting used to eating out alone. I was thinking about the day ahead as I sipped my coffee. I had to be at work by 7. On the 30th, I was ready to head to Kristen's parents' house. I knew they were early risers, so I knocked on their kitchen door. I saw them sitting at the table, mid-breakfast. Kristen's father waved me in, recognizing me immediately. I took a seat, and Kristen's mother poured me a cup of coffee. "Bob, what brings you here so early?" "You want some breakfast?" her father asked. "No, thanks," I said. "I already ate at IHOP." "There's something important I need to talk to you about," her mother said, frowning. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I'm divorcing Kristen." Her mother's hand slipped, and the coffee cup crashed to the floor. The sound echoed in the room. The room fell silent as her face went pale with shock. "Divorcing Kristen," her mother gasped, her voice filled with disbelief. "This can't be real. You two were planning to start a family." "I'm afraid it's true," I replied solemnly. "She's been having an affair for the past few months, and there's a chance she's pregnant by the man she's been seeing." At that moment, Norman, Kristen's younger brother, walked into the kitchen. He'd heard the commotion and caught the last bit of what I'd said. His eyes widened. "What's wrong?" he muttered, joining his parents in stunned silence. Questions came at me from all angles. "Are you sure? How did this happen? Where is Kristen? I couldn't you two need to work it out? Who is the other man?" I did my best to answer their questions. "Yes, I'm certain. I said I have emails and motel records to prove it." She confessed everything to me. She's probably still at home, unless she's staying at Sam's place. Either way, there's no fixing this. I believe she tried. She's trying to get pregnant by him and pass the baby off as mine. I can't forgive that. "Who's the other man?" her father asked. I told him he's married, and from what I've heard, he has children of his own. Kristen's mother shot up from her seat and rushed toward the phone. "I need to speak to her. I can't believe my daughter would do something like this." "You should call her," I said, standing to leave. "I need your support, but don't sugarcoat it. She needs to face the consequences of what she's done. She's broken 2 families, not just ours." I could hear her mother dialing the phone as I headed toward Kristen's father took my hand. His eyes were filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Bob. I don't know what to say." He squeezed my hand gently, and I felt a pang of sadness. I genuinely liked her family, and I hated that they were caught in the middle of this mess. There was no way to soften the blow. I left their house feeling heavy. I knew this was going to cause pain for everyone involved. Next, I drove to William Wildhouse parking on the street in front of their modest bungalow. I approached the door with the packet of evidence in hand and rang the bell. William himself answered, his face streaked with tears. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I need to speak with your wife and give her something. She's not available." You can give whatever you have to me, and I'll make sure she gets it. I suggest you let her come to the door, or I'll take legal action against you for alienation of affection." William hesitated for a moment, then sighed and called out, "Maggie, someone's here to see you." He turned back to me, glaring. "You bastard," William said. "No. You're the one who broke your vows and shattered my marriage. Now I intend to do the same," I said, my tone flat. Megan appeared in the doorway, her face full of confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, clearly puzzled by the tension in the room. I handed her the packet. It had copies of emails they exchanged along with records of their meetings at the motel. As I spoke, I watched her face change. The shock was spreading across her features as the reality of my words hit her. "Is this true?" she asked. "You can ask your husband." "I'm standing right here," William replied. He broke down. "I'm sorry, Miji. I'm sorry." Her face turned ashen, and she looked back at me, the pain in her eyes evident. "I'm sorry too, Mrs. Wilde. I wish we hadn't ended up with such disappointing spouses. I also feel for you and your children. You should know that my wife might be pregnant with your husband's child." I gave her the packet and nodded. "Do what you need to with the info. I'm sorry for what you're going through." I left because I couldn't bear to see her heartbroken any longer. I wanted to protect her from the pain, but there was nothing I could do to soften the blow. When I got back, the house was empty. Kristen wasn't there. I didn't care where she'd gone. Once upon a time, I'd have worried about her safety or felt incomplete without her, but now I felt indifferent. I changed into old clothes and went out to mow the lawn, needing something to take my mind off everything. In the end, Kristen, despite her family's objections, decided to terminate the pregnancy. It drove a wedge between her and her family, and they've been distant ever since. The divorce was finalized not long after, following the terms I'd set: no alimony and equal division of assets. Now I'm single, and while I'm looking for a new partner, I find myself grappling with trust issues. I've started therapy and read up on psychological ethics, trying to understand what went wrong and how to move forward. I'm not sure if any of it will help, but I'm hoping it will guide me as I search for someone new, 2 years after the divorce. I had another chance to get back at Kristen. I found out she was engaged again after speaking with her fiancé. I shared the details of our marriage, and not long after, he called off the engagement. I felt like a small victory. I've even started keeping an eye on her to see if she tries to get engaged again. As for William and Miji, they're still together. I hear she keeps a tight rein on him. I guess having children was enough to keep them from. I'm relieved I found out about Kristen's betrayal before we started a family of our own. Thanks for watching this emotional story of love, lust, and lies. I hope it touched your heart. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a fresh story every day. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to share your experiences and tell your story.